All right. Hey, you guys. So, what I'm going to do, since our little recording system here at school isn't working, is I'm going to use our old school one, upload it on YouTube, and then upload it on our page, which is a lot more steps. But it is approximately 9 o'clock in the morning. I am going to read our social studies starting right now. I really want to get started early on it because I think it's going to take a good chunk of time. And hopefully, when our awesome real recorder steps on here and starts working, we can get our language arts done together digitally. But who knows? Okay, so today is week 13. We are starting chapter 5 for social studies. So hopefully we'll narrow it down. But just a quick review of some of our chapters that we've done. We talked about early Ojibwe people, early Dakota people, and now, oh, for good grief. Now we're talking about the fur trade. So I'm going to read chapter, upload it. You guys can go back. John made copies of this entire chapter for you to have right in front of you as we read it. All right, so let's see here. I got to turn off mute and probably turn off the radio, right? Okay, that's going to be better. Okay, chapter 5, the fur page. We are on page 73. It is, the timeline starts at about 1660. It says Radisson and Grossier explore the upper Mississippi River Valley, establishing trade routes for the French. In 1670, Hudson Bay Company, a British fur trading company in North America, starts. In 1680, Father Louis Hennepin travels up the Mississippi River to present-day Minnesota. 1680s, following the alliance between the Dakota and the Ojibwe in 1679, Ojibwe traders begin traveling into Dakota territory to pick up furs and deliver trade goods. 1736 to 1770, the Dakota and the Ojibwe fight over territory. Warfare continues after 1770, but on a much smaller scale. 1756 to 1763, Great Britain defeats France in the French and Indian War, ending French control in Canada. 1768, the British begin construction on a fur trading post at Grand Portage. 1775 to 1783, Revolutionary Wars fought for U.S. independence from Great Britain. 1784, fur traders in Montreal, Canada, from the Northwest Company to compete with the Hudson Bay Company. 1803, the U.S. purchases Louisiana Territory from France. In 1804, Lewis and Clark expedition begins. Fur trader John Sayre builds a trading post in the Snake River in present-day east central Minnesota. 1808, U.S. businessman John Jacob Astor forms the American Fur Company. 1812, War of 1812 between the U.S. and Great Britain disrupts trade throughout North America. 1850, the War of 1812 ends. The British cannot trade in Minnesota without becoming U.S. citizens. Okay, here we go. Okay, so in the first picture here, right here, it says we have the voyagers paddling a canoe through the rapids, one of the most dangerous parts of the fur trade. So we're about to enter into a world that is extremely dangerous. The people that were known as fur traders, they spent a lot of their life traveling away from their families, going, trying to navigate, traveling all the way through Canada and back to Minnesota. Fur got to be a really hot product in Europe, so across the ocean. So they had to figure out a way how to get it from Minnesota all the way to Europe. And these weren't the greatest of conditions. Hey, Miss Asia, I miss ya. Okay, let's see here. The fur trade. We're starting our fur trade. And hopefully we'll hear a lot of stories of people dying, which is always exciting. Okay, the fur trade. The fur trade brought American Indians and Europeans together as trading partners in Minnesota and other parts of North America. Many people were involved in this trade over the course of several hundred years. Explore the roles and relationships of the people involved in the fur trade and the seasonal nature of their work. Look for, compare and contrast the purpose of trade in American Indian and European cultures. Why did explorers and missionaries come to Minnesota? Why was North American fur so valuable? How did each group benefit from the fur trade? Name 5 nations involved in the fur trade in Minnesota. What were the roles of people involved in the fur trade? Key terms are prophet, resource, fur trader, pelt, hunter, guide, interpreter, clerk, voyager. Okay, so let's get into it. So at this time, in approximately, I don't know, between 1660 and early 1800s, one really super popular fur was beaver pelt. And people from like France and Germany and England would pay incredible amounts of money to get their hands, especially on beaver fur. And I don't know if you've ever touched beaver fur before, but it is like velvet. It's so nice and smooth. But these people in Europe would put it, generally speaking, on the inside of their hats to keep them warm, but also it was super high fashion. So this fur trade was bringing in tons and tons and tons of money, okay? So let's start. So if you'd like to follow along, remember we're in our social studies books. John copied off these pages for you, but we're on page 74 right now. And periodically I'll go through and just tell you what page we're on. Okay, trade is a part of every culture. Traders bring goods from places where they are abundant to places where they are scarce. Before Europeans came to North America, American Indian traders traveled on the waterways, visiting distant villages and exchanging goods. A chunk of copper might be traded for a bunch of sharp arrowheads, or maybe for a buffalo robe. Sometimes people traded for new kinds of food or a new type of seed that would grow better. At times, they gave special goods to a neighboring group in order to befriend them. Trade provided tools and materials that made life better. Trade was a major part of American Indian life. So just a big nod to talking about our Ojibwe culture and how the Ojibwe people made friends with the Dakota people. So Dakota people were in Minnesota before Ojibwe migrated in. And the Ojibwe people brought tons of stuff from the East Coast that was valuable and to make friends with the Dakota people. Okay, the trade network connected American Indians from all across North America. In modern-day Minnesota, archaeologists have uncovered special types of flint from North Dakota, copper from around Lake Michigan, and seashells from the ocean. Traders brought these materials from distant places long before Europeans came to North America. In most places, people traded things they had for goods they could not get themselves. In places that used money, such as Europe, trade had a different purpose. The goal of most European trade was to make money. Goods such as spices from Asia, gold from Africa, or furs from North America could be sold for a lot of money in Europe. Okay, so in most places, people traded things they had for goods they could not get themselves. In places that used money, such as Europe, okay, we already read this. Trade had a different purpose. The goal of most European trade was to make money. Goods such as spices from Asia, gold from Africa, and furs from North America could be sold for a lot of money in Europe. Rich Europeans were willing to pay high prices for these rare items. This meant that traders could make a profit. European traders could use that profit to buy things they could not afford otherwise. In Europe, making a profit was what mattered in the trading business. In North America, the Ojibwe and Dakota traded for things they wanted or needed, not to make a profit. These two worlds, European and American Indian, met in what we now call the fur trade. Beginnings of exploration and trade. Many Europeans came to North America to find new resources that could gather and sell for a profit back to in Europe. In the late 1500s, French explorers and fishermen came to the Atlantic coast of what is now eastern Canada. They found a place with people, with timber, and with animals, including beavers, mink, and otters. Europeans prized these animals for their fur, which was used to make coats and hats. In the 1600s, French traders came to trade with American Indians. In exchange for furs, the Frenchmen offered blankets, jewelry, and useful metal goods such as knives, kettles, guns, and needles. The native people thought that they were getting a bargain, and so did the French. Before long, the exchange of goods grew into a big business. European traders were traveling farther inland in search of new sources of furs. By the early 1700s, fur traders had started setting up trading centers around the Great Lakes and in the lands of the Dakotas and the Ojibwe. I want, you want. We're on page 76. The fur trade thrived because the Europeans wanted things that the American Indians had, and the American Indians wanted things that the Europeans had. Many Dakota and Ojibwe wanted European goods. Clothes made of woven fabrics were comfortable and required less work than making leather clothing. Colorful glass beads provided a new way to decorate leather moccasins and bags. Oh, that's good. Brass and tin kettles to decorate hides and clothing. Many of the Dakota and Ojibwe found that these and other goods, such as axes and guns, made life simpler. The Europeans wanted pelts, especially from beavers. Hats made with beaver fur were considered symbols of the rich and powerful in Europe. People there were willing to pay a lot of money for them. Beavers had been hunted so much in Europe that they were almost extinct. Hat makers turned to fur traders who were working in North America, skilled hunters and trappers. The Dakota and the Ojibwe could supply the Europeans with the pelts they wanted. Page 77. More than furs. Besides the valuable furs, European traders needed food, labor, and tools, things that made living in the wilderness possible. French and British traders traveled long distances from the east coast of North America to set up trading posts each year in Ojibwe and Dakota lands. The Europeans would and could not carry enough food to last through the winter, so they traded with native people for rice, wild rice, meat, and maple sugar. They also traded for canoes and hired Ojibwe or Dakota guides to help them navigate the miles of twisting rivers and trails. The Europeans also needed interpreters to help the traders communicate with the Dakota and Ojibwe. Without the support of the American Indian trading partners, European traders could not have survived, let alone made a profit. So, just a reminder, a guide is a person hired to help voyagers and fur traders find their way through unfamiliar lands. So there were lots of Dakota and Ojibwe guides that were helping the European fur traders navigate Minnesota. And an interpreter is a person who translates for people who speak different languages. So again, a lot of Ojibwe and Dakota interpreters, because they would learn a little bit of English and they could translate that to, I don't know, whoever they were going around, whoever they were trying to trade with for, because these Europeans coming in, it was rare that they knew a lick of the Ojibwe language or the Dakota languages going on. So they needed people to translate to. Okay, we're on page 76. The business of trading. In Europe, people exchanged goods and services for money. European businessmen formed companies such as the Northwest Company in order to profit from the fur trade. Company owners and investors, those who put their money into a company to help it grow, became wealthy by acquiring furs for American Indians in North America and selling those furs in London and Paris. These companies traded with many native groups at trading posts all around the Great Lakes and across Canada. The business connections of fur trade companies stretched across the globe. Companies bought goods from around the world to trade with the American Indians. They purchased beads from businesses in Italy and Germany. Iron tools and clothes came from France and Britain. Special red dyes were brought in from China and India. Because the American Indians did not use money, European fur traders developed different ways to buy furs for them. Sometimes the fur trade was a simple matter of exchange. I'll give you this and you give me that. Often, though, it was more complicated because each group had different traditions and ways of doing things. Traditions such as generosity, gift-giving, and kinship were important to native people. European traders used these traditions to support business, often giving presents to strengthen relationships with their native trading partners. Sometimes they married Ojibwe and Dakota women to create kinship ties. When a trader did this, his wife's relatives often became his best customers. Marriage to a trader gave the women's relatives easier access to desirable European goods. Page 80, big business and big changes. Okay, great. I should have checked to see how long this chapter was. Maybe I can get it done today. To 98, I think so. Okay, big business, big changes. Most Europeans thought it was important to make money and own personal property. The fur trading company was no different. Owners and investors, those who put their money into a company to help it grow, became wealthy by bringing beaver and muskrat furs from North America to London and Paris. Trade with the Dakota and Ojibwe was one part of this far-reaching business. These companies also had trading posts all around the Great Lakes and across what is now known as Canada. This trade grew throughout the 1700s and became a massive international business. The fur trading company became very powerful.
Already skilled hunters and trappers, native people became more efficient at gathering furs. They used steel traps provided by the Europeans to help gather more beaver pelts. They used iron spearheads, chisels, and axes provided by the Europeans to make it easier to cut into the winter lodges of muskrats. With these new tools, American Indian hunters were able to gather more and more pelts each year. The pelts became like money for the native people. More pelts meant that they were able to purchase more goods from the traders for themselves and their families. As the fur trading business began growing bigger in the 1700s, Europeans and American Indians came to rely on each other for the goods the other could provide. American Indians could now trade for goods they could not make themselves. Some of them became reliant on those goods to make their lives easier. The French and British, on the other hand, relied on the furs to make profit in Europe. Trade in Minnesota. In the land that is now Minnesota, the fur trade went through many changes. During the early 1700s, the Ojibwe and the Dakota traded most with the French. In the mid-1700s, Great Britain and France fought over control of North America in the French and Indian War, 1756 to 1763. After Britain won the war, the Ojibwe and Dakota usually did business with the British. By the beginning of the 1800s, a few big companies controlled the fur trade in North America. In the land of the Ojibwe and the Dakota, the biggest fur trading company was the British-owned Northwest Company. Late each summer, crews of men set out from the Northwest Company's large trading post at Grand Portage. They headed for fur posts throughout areas that now make up northern and central Minnesota. In 1804, one of those crews left to establish a new Northwest Company trading post in the Snake River in present-day Pine County. The lands around the Snake River were a mixture of forest, wetlands, and prairie. The Ojibwe controlled much of the area, but the Dakota were nearby. For 6 months, the Ojibwe and the Northwest Company did business at the new post on the Snake River. The things that happened there during the trading season of 1804 and 1805 can tell us a lot about how the fur trade actually worked. Okay, page 82. I'm going to take this cap off. Just put it over there forever. Okay, a year at the post. In autumn, a party of about a dozen people arrived by canoe at the Snake River site in early October 1804. Hey, Davion. I am just reading our weekly book for, our weekly chapter for for social studies. It's chapter 5 for week 13. A party of about a dozen people arrived by canoe, on the Snake River in early October 1804. The group was led by John Sayer, an experienced trader and one of the owners of the Northwest Company. On this trip, he brought along his Ojibwe wife, Obima Anokwe, to help him build bonds of respect and trust with his Ojibwe trading partners. Over the next 2 months, Sayer oversaw the construction of a new fort and established business relationships with the Ojibwe living near the Snake River. Okay, a man named... What's that, Asia?
What are we doing?
I am reading chapter 5 of our social studies. If you'd like to follow along, we're on page 84. Okay, a Canadian man named Seraphim Laramie was Sayer's clerk, his main assistant at the Snake River Post. Sayer depended on Laramie to supervise the hired men and to check on the progress of the Ojibwe hunters and trappers. Like most clerks, Laramie also kept track of all the goods traded at the post. Joseph Girard was one of 8 voyageurs. These men paddled Sayer's canoes loaded with trade goods up the Snake River. Their travel, however, wasn't all by water. They also had to carry 90-pound packs of their heavy canoes over portages, places where goods and boats had to be carried overland. For 6 weeks, Girard and the other voyageurs spent their days constructing the fort's living quarters and protective walls. When they weren't building the fort, they were doing other jobs, including catching fish and cutting firewood for the coming winter. The Snake River Ojibwe were frequent visitors while the fort was under construction. Many of them had done business with the fur trading companies before, and they were eager to do so again. An elder named Mansomanin was among the first Ojibwe to bring beaver pelts to the new post. He and other Ojibwe traded wild rice, meat, and other foods. In return, they received goods that were valuable to them, including tools, ammunition, and tobacco. Many of the goods they received from the company during the fall were given on credit. This meant that they were expected to pay back the company later, after they collected animal pelts during the winter. Excuse me. Okay, winter, page 85. The family of Masomanin and the other elder Ojibwe spread out through the surrounding forest as the winter turned cold. Small family groups camped and hunted in certain areas. The men hunted for deer, bears, muskrats, and beavers to feed their families and to use in trade. They trapped most of the beavers in the winter because that was when the animals' coats were the thickest. The women cooked food and prepared the furs so they could be traded for other goods. John Sayer had spent many difficult winters in the fur trade, so he knew it was important to be careful with the fort's limited supplies. He drove hard bargains in his trades with the Ojibwe. He kept tight control over his workers' rations or portions of food and liquor. He often sent his men to the Ojibwe lodges to trade for extra deer and bear meat. As the Northwest Company's top representative in the region, he also kept a close watch on other companies with trading posts in the area. Seraphin Laramie's main job was to make sure that his boss's instructions were carried out. He often accompanied the voyagers on their visits to the Ojibwe lodges. He made occasional visits to a competitor's post to see how it was doing. Joseph Girard and his fellow voyagers spent much of their time away from the fort, at the winter lodges of the Ojibwe. It's likely that some of them lived with their Ojibwe wives and children. When the voyagers returned to the fort, they usually brought back food and furs to refill the company's dwindling supplies. They also built sleds, chopped wood, and performed other chores assigned by them to Sayre and Laramie. Spring. As the weather turned warmer, John Sayre carefully counted the number of beaver pelts brought to him by his Ojibwe trading partners. By the time he left the Snake River post in late April, he had hundreds of pelts. He hoped that the other owners of the Northwest Company would be happy with his haul. For weeks after leaving the Snake River, Sayre and his party arrived at Fort Williams. This was a large Northwest Company trading center north of Grand Portage in what is now Canada. Seraphin Laramie did his best to keep his boss happy, but he did not always succeed. When he returned from a visit to the Ojibwe with no beaver pelt, Sayre scolded Laramie for not getting enough furs and trades with the Ojibwe. Joseph Girard and the other voyagers worked hard during their last weeks at the fort. They netted fish and hunted ducks. They took the canoes out of storage and repaired them. They packed the beaver pelts into bundles that would make them easier to load and unload. Finally, they said goodbye to their wives and children and launched their canoes on the long journey to Fort Williams. We're on page 88. And I'm not reading the side sections right now. I'll come back in a little bit and start reading those on another tape. Sometimes the voyagers returned to their Ojibwe families the next year. Sometimes they never came back. Mont Samanane and many of the other Ojibwe men continued to hunt beavers, even as Sayre and his men prepared to depart. Some Ojibwe turned their attention to the making and repairing of canoes. In early March, the Ojibwe women left for the sugar camps to collect sap and make maple sugar. In April, the leaders of most Ojibwe bands made their final visits to the fort. There, they delivered their beaver pelts to pay what they owed to the company or buy more goods if they had extra. They also received gifts of medals, ammunition, and tobacco from Sayre. The medals were symbols of a trading partnership that they hoped to renew in the fall. Summer. Each year, the trading cycle ended with an event called Rendezvous. This gathering of people involved in the fur trade lasted for weeks. For many years, the rendezvous happened at Grand Portage on Lake Superior. By 1805, it had moved farther up to the lake to Fort Williams. Hundreds of traders, clerks, voyagers, and native people gathered for the rendezvous each June. They brought with them thousands of tons of pelts. During the weeks that followed, workers counted, repacked, and loaded the pelts for the trip through the Great Lakes to Montreal. From there, sailing ships would carry the pelts across the Atlantic Ocean to London, Paris, and other European cities. At the same time, huge canoes arrived from Montreal carrying tons of manufactured goods. As the boats were unloaded, traders collected the goods they had ordered for the coming season. Before long, voyagers would make the journey to bring these goods to the winter post, where the cycle of trading would begin again. Coming changes. The European traders, along with the American Indian suppliers, all belonged to a vast trading network that took only a few decades to develop. Native people caught the animals, prepared the furs, and sold them to the Europeans. The Europeans and American Indians bargained with each other to get the best possible deals. The voyagers paddled hundreds of miles carrying trade goods and pelts back and forth between the trading posts and the big settlements such as Montreal. For more than 100 years, the fur trading brought new, useful goods to the Dakota and Ojibwe people, but at a cost. By the 1800s, these new manufactured goods began to replace traditional tools. Steel axes were durable, and it was easier to trap furs to trade for a metal axe than it was to make a stone axe. Over time, the Dakota and Ojibwe relied more and more on the goods provided by the French and the British. Skills such as making axes from stone became less important. New ways of living were replacing ways that had been successful for centuries. By 1804, when Sayre set up his post on the Snake River, the fur trade with the British was entering its final years. After the War of 1812 ended, only U.S. citizens were allowed to trade in this area. By 1825, the American Fur Company would take control of the fur trade in this region. If the British and French wanted to keep trading here, they would have to become U.S. citizens. It was one of the first signs that this new nation which had formed in lands to the east, was now looking west to the lands of the Dakota and the Ojibwe. Okay, so that was the rest of the chapter. Now I will go back, and there's on page 90, there's trading places with voyagers, which will kind of give a little bit of insight into what the voyagers were doing. Okay.